So if I always knew that the key to good lighting in this room is to have all the lights but one off, I would have done it a really long time ago. This is one of my favorite books. And it is the first book I picked up in 2020 because, you know, the classic book of the 20s is the book you should be reading in the 20s. And I wanted it to be my 120th book because not only is that poetic, it's also the end of my Goodreads goal. And then I got into dramatics and I read The Yellow Wallpaper to my roommate. So I'm going to pretend like this is my 120th book, but I also need to finish it before I read another official book so that I can pretend like it's my 120th book because I'm a liar. The writing is so gorgeous. Like, I haven't TikToked or done it because I mostly just, this is my, like, it's actually kind of beat up now, but it's my room, it's the one I bring in the car, it's the one I bring in stores. I was, like, reading in Starbucks an hour ago, and people looked at me like I was really pretentious. But I love the writing, and I feel like this is a book I could carry around always and just read over and over and over again. Like, there was something that said back here, maybe I put it somewhere else because I've been reading it. Daisy put her arm through his abruptly, but he seemed absorbed in what he had just said. Possibly it had occurred to him that the colossal significance of that light had now vanished forever. Compared to the great distance that had separated him from Daisy, it had seemed very near to her, almost touching her. It had seemed as close as the star to the moon. Now it was again a green light on a dock. His count of enchanted objects had diminished by one. Like, it might be like the most beautiful book ever. And it just like, it hits like something that is a symbol. And it's interesting when something that was a symbol becomes not a symbol anymore. I've had that in relationships, I've had that in friendships, and seeing those things. And in that situation, like, I think that that's why so many writers have such a hard time writing like people in healthy relationships or in marriages, because so often they want them to have that tension, and then when the tension is relieved, it seems less meaningful, even though marriage or relationships are often like the most meaningful thing of your life, and that being them is much better than wanting to be in them. And yet we diminish it in media and books. It always ends with the marriage, or it ends with them getting together, and we don't actually see them. And I love relationships where we actually see them. Not that saying that being single or any of those things are not important. Being single is wonderful. I love being single. And like sometimes the older I get, the more I'm like, yes, but like when I am in a relationship, hopefully for the rest of my life, I will lose a lot of things that I don't get to do because being single is fun. Anyways, also talking about singleness. What else do we have? I am in many places. I think I need to go back another page. But his heart was constant, a turbulent riot. The most grotesque and fantastic conceits haunted him in the bed at night. A universe of ineffable gaudiness spun itself out in his brain while the clock ticked on the washstand and the moon soaked with wet light his tangled clothes upon the floor. Each night he added to the pattern of his fancies until drowsiness closed down upon some vivid scene with a oblivious embrace. For a while these reveries provided an outlet for his imagination. They were a satisfactory hint of the unreality of reality, a promise that the rock of the world was founded securely on a fairy's wing. Like, that's not the most pronoun line, but it's a Gatsby line, so it's dang good. I could talk about this all night. I really could. I also can't tell if you can hear my roommate in the background cackling, which if you can't, then this is weird. If not, it's really weird that I haven't addressed it. She's playing games with her siblings online, which is why she's laughing her head off. Welcome to November, where I have a very sexy husky voice because I'm very sick and can't stop coughing, and where I'm screaming at Thomas Hardy because my goodness. Tess of the That's still a butcher of that name. Yeah, I can't sleep because I'm really sick, so I listened to all of it, and I am in shock. I'm in denial. I am disturbed. I am impressed. There's a lot of words going on. I probably look terrified because of the terrible light. Yeah, really, really good. That was my 119th book, so now I'm going to read Great Gatsby as my 120th, which was my first book, and also, obviously, like,
the epitome of the 1920s in literature. So I'm very glad to read it as my first book I started and my 120th, which is my reading Goodreads goal for the year. So yeah, I'm excited for that. I'm probably gonna do that because I'm still feeling terrible.
I wasn't joking. I wasn't joking about the turtlenecks. So I finished Another Brooklyn, which was amazing. I finished Pet Sematary, which was amazing, and I've just been in like reading everything, which is so great. I'm in the middle of The Only Good Indians, which I'm so excited, especially after loving the horror of Pet Sematary, and I'm kind of really disappointed. Like, it has great social commentary about, like, discrimination against the Native community and stuff like that. But it's not that terrifying. Like, maybe it's a cultural divide where I just don't get the terror and I don't understand all the traditions. But currently I'm just like, I don't know, I don't feel freaked out, even though like something like Pet Sematary, which I can't relate to being a father of young children or like losing a pet or like things like that. Like, I've lost pets, but none of them have been killed on the road, or things like that where I'm just like, I'm normally really good at like getting the ominous, but like, I don't know, and there's a lot of characters and there's not a lot of clear narrative. Again, that might be a divide between culture where I'm just not understanding native storytelling well, but I'm not very freaked out. I'm getting to the end where like I get that it's like hyping up and I'm still not very freaked out. Like, it's a little unnerving in like a small way, but I don't know, it's outside of like, I guess it's very based on folklore, and because I don't believe in folklore, then it's less terrifying to me because it's not like something that like I can relate to happening, when like grief is something I can relate to happening and I understand how that makes you really insane. So it might just be like a divide of me not understanding or being freaked out because of personal experience. But yeah, that is me and The Only Good Indians. I'm really hoping I want to love it because I was like so excited, and maybe that's part of it too, because like when you have such high expectations, sometimes that leads you to not enjoying a book as much as you can. But Another Brooklyn, incredible. Like, it doesn't have a plot, which is one of my favorite things, but like looking at memories, looking at family and like faith, well, not faith, but like how her family goes through, and like looking at the 70s and looking at the rise of like Islam and regards to that, and the civil rights movement, which I feel like is often not talked about in books, even though it was very common. And yeah, it's just a wonderful story. Also dealing with a lot of sexual violence. Oh, and I read Miracle Creek as well. I've read so many books, which was also really good. I didn't like love it. It was a 3-star where like I appreciated the story. I was compelled, but I didn't feel, again, connected to the characters. Like, part of it, and it's hard because like a lot of it deals with mothers who have autistic children. And as someone with a disability, it's very hard to listen to people talk about how difficult that is, because I get that like me needing care for the rest of my life, like maybe not to the degree of some children, but like that's very difficult to read, and there's no like resolve or really like, it's more like it's okay to hate your kids who are disabled, and it's like, I know that's not like completely, it's trying to look at the complexity, but there was never like a moment when they're like, maybe you shouldn't feel that hatred or frustration or relief. So yeah, it had some ableism in that I'm not sure that completely disappeared. It had sexual violence that was never completely accounted for, but I feel like that she was trying to see that a lot of people, even though it's a murder trial and they may get trialed for violent crimes, that sexual crimes are not often persecuted with the same amount, or prosecuted with the same amount of vigor. Anyways, those are my thoughts in the moment. But yeah, I liked it.
As I went to the library after dark, I couldn't do my nice wall thing, which I probably should own up to not being able to do soon because it's going to be winter and I think that there will be snow and we don't get library books wet. But for books I come through, we have The Watchmen, which I've been excited to read for a while. I started reading in 2018, really loved it. I hadn't gotten that much into like graphic novels, so it probably was not the best time to pick up this very large mammoth. And also it has a ton of sexual violence, and at the time I was still dealing with trauma from my own, so I couldn't finish it. Then we have The Lottery. I just read her collected short stories by Shirley Jackson and I loved it. This is the graphic novel. I'm very excited to be reading it. And then we have Herland by Charlotte Gilman, Charlotte Perkins Gilman, and I really like her. I'm really sad this is mass market paperback. As a dyslexic, I find like writing and reading this amount small just confuses me. Like, I need some space to be able to read the letters, otherwise it takes me forever, so I might not read this. But this is a letter that is a feminist utopia, I believe, and I just read a bunch of her, well, not a bunch, 3 of her stories, and reread The Yellow Wallpaper, which is one of my favorite novels, or novellas, and I wanted to read more of hers, but the short stories, they're very hard to get. So if anyone knows where to get, like, the stories, the short stories, because like I looked at her bibliography, she has like hundreds, so I can't find them. And then I have Sula, which I reread in October, and was surprised that I actually liked it a lot more than the first time, which I gave a rant review of. And that's probably because I just hadn't read a lot of classics, didn't know what I was going into, and I disliked the character, and I realized since that, you know, just because you dislike the main character does not mean that you need to hate her. So I'm excited to do a review and like discussion, but I want to be able to like go through and like read some of the passages and stuff. And then I have To Herlin and Beyond, and this is a biography of Charlotte Perkins Gilman. I was hoping that it had some short stories, but it doesn't look like it, so I don't know if I'll read it all or just like flip through it or whatever. And yeah, these are the books that I got from the library. I'm very excited to read them, and yeah. So I'm currently a little stuck because I finished The Only Good Indians, and I was never scared. Like, I was never even so much as freaked out. Like, the last few sentences, I'm like, ooh, cool. But like, I don't know. I never felt really connected because like I didn't get to like, I don't know, I didn't feel like I saw very like into their hearts. And maybe again, this is only me, like they would talk about experiences, but like even when they're talking about like best friends and stuff like that, I didn't feel like this piercing closeness. And I don't know, like maybe it's my own distance, maybe it's like a writing style that just didn't really jive with me, but like I didn't feel freaked out. I didn't feel like super connected or invested in their coming out. And it's like it's kind of the opposite, where like it has really good conversations, but like I don't know how to deal with that because I wasn't compelled by the plot. It's like the opposite of Miracle Creek or One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, where I'm like, I think that they had really compelling plots, but I'm not 100% okay with the depictions of like One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, of like the sexism that was in it, or representation of mental health, or the racism in it. Where like Miracle Creek, I'm like, I think that it did a wonderful job, and like it did have a wonderful conversation about like immigration and like the cultural divide between children and parents who immigrate and like things like that, and it was wonderful. But I'm also not okay with the sexual violence that was unaccounted for. Like that's probably the least one, because I think that she talked about that in her author interview about why she did that, but about like the conversation about being autistic and like disability, and very much like never ever having a positive thing of disability ever. Like the only thing that's ever presented as good is the fact that the mother feels closer to her children because her children will always rely on her, but it's also shown as a bad thing. And I'm like, and that, I don't know, like I think that talking about the important thing that like, you know, there's another side to being like the mother who is the saint who takes care of her child for the rest of their life, but there's also like there's never a moment in which they're like, wow, like the people who are literally the villains of the story are the people who are like being a proud autistic mother. And I know that I'm more personally affected by this, someone who like knows that I, you know, disability and things like that, like those are a part of my daily life. I don't have autism, but I have many friends who have autism, and like I don't think that this would be great positive representation for them. And like it's so much of the narrative that like it is a burden more than like obviously it is still a neurodivergence. I'm not saying anything like that, but like it does not in any way affirm and or like it's autism representation from an outside autism representation, which means like there's this level of like let's understand the struggle of the mother rather than let's understand the struggle of the child. And that's really hard to see as someone who's disabled, who often disabled people are shown to be the other in the narrative and are never given their own point of views. And that's very difficult, especially since there were so many people represented. Like, we got to see representations from murderers, from child abusers, from people who committed sexual violence, but like, we can't see. And like, I did actually genuinely like the story, but I'm like, that one part that just struggles me. And like, I'm so conflicted about Miracle Creek. Anyways, what I'm saying is the opposite effect, where I'm like, I wasn't really compelled by the story, but the representation was really good. So what do I do about that? I don't know how to rate books. Rating books is hard.